Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hey, welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. We have, as most of you know, of course, just gone through a Canadian election here. Just a few months ago, back in November of last year, the Americans went through their electoral process. And invariably, when all is said and done, and that usually takes a long time these days, there's an awful lot of criticism about, well, is there a better way to do this? And that's not just a rhetorical question. I mean, people have been asking this for some time right now. Is there a better way to elect our representatives to make sure that it's done in a democratic way and that we get the right people there? I don't know. I mean, I talk about this, and I've talked about this many times in the radio days after elections, and we've had some great dialogue back and forth about this. And it's not an easy question to try to get an answer to. But I think to do so and to give it some context, we need to kind of look at the system that we're dealing with right now and how we got there. And I'm not going to get into the long logistics of the history of this, but very briefly, we in Canada, of course, work with the British parliamentary system. And that was born back in the days, of course, of, well, folks like Oliver Cromwell and some other ne'er-do-well rebellious Brits who just said, look at this stuff about the king and absolute rule. Not working, okay? We're getting dumped on here, and we want the people to have some power. Power to the people. That's, you see, John Lennon wasn't the first Brit to say power to the people. It was Oliver Cromwell and a bunch of other folks like that said they have to have a voice. The commoners have to have a voice. So King John and others finally relented and said, okay, you can have your elections. And the system was born, the British parliamentary system. But it was a vote for the commoners, which is, by the way, here's a fun fact for you. That's why they call the place where they meet the House of Commons, because it was supposed to be where the commoners elected their representatives. But the powers that be thought, you know what, these people are uneducated. They really don't know what's going on. So let them have their say so they don't rebel and try to, storm the castles anymore. But we've got to have another body over and above that to kind of oversee, to make sure that they get it right. So they established the House of Lords in Britain. Those were the intelligentsia, the educated people, the landowners, for instance. And they had an opportunity to oversee what the commoners decided to do and to say, yeah, that's right or that's wrong or whatever, and make changes to it. So, and we have basically adopted the same system here. We don't have a House of Lords, but we have the Senate, which was supposed to perform the same function. And both of them, of course, are based on the fact that we, the commoners, you can have your vote, but we'll have to ascertain whether or not you guys got it right, because we're the educated ones. We're the ones that really know what should be going on. So yeah, there's a real problem, I think, just kind of inbred into this whole system. Mind you, some people are suggesting, well, what's changed from back in those days to now? I was thinking of the classic quote from Winston Churchill that said, democracy is the worst form of government, unless you compare it to all the other alternatives. And there were some that suggest that our system of government right now and of electing our governments is terrible unless you compare it to some of the alternatives. However, there are those that would suggest that there should be a discussion about that. And by the way, for our American viewers and listeners, great to have you with us. I always enjoy your feedback as well. Your system was based on the same premise. The founding fathers, God bless them, Alexander Hamilton and the whole bunch there, also had the same concerns. They wanted to have a democracy. The King George was a jerk. That's basically, let's face it, one of the main reasons for the American Revolution, right? But they thought, okay, again, these are commoners, these are farmers, these are people that don't have the education. Can they really be trusted to elect the right people? So they decided, okay, we'll have elections, we'll give you guys all a vote, but we're going to have what they call an electoral college that are going to meet after you guys have your vote, and they're going to look at the vote and basically either ratify it or say, yeah, you know what, you guys got it wrong. And that still exists today. I don't know why, but it still exists today. And it's the bane of existence for an awful lot of people in the States that say, look, it's not necessary anymore, but it's still there. And there's the germ, I guess, of where the debate comes from about changing the way that we vote people in and how we let them govern. It's been there. Everybody seems to think there are major flaws in it, but nobody seems to be able to say, okay, let's do something about it. Now, other countries, other jurisdictions have, and there are other examples of how this whole system works. And there are three basic, I guess, ways to do this. The one that we do, let you go vote, I go vote. They count the votes, and whoever has the most votes is the winner, right? Easy, right? It's called the first past the post. In other words, you got more votes than that guy, than that person, you get the seat, or you become whatever it is that the office is. And that seemed to work pretty well when there were only two political parties. But now, of course, times have changed. Here in Canada, we've got the Conservatives, you've got the Liberals, you've got the Green Party, you've got the NDP, you've got a number of others, the People's Party, if they're still in existence, and a couple of other little fringe parties. So the chances of actually having you with 60%, you with 40%, okay, you with 60, you're the winner. It's different now. It's one thing to say, okay, you got a majority of votes, but oftentimes now it's a plurality. You might end up with 30% of the vote, but you're the winner because you got more votes than the other people combined. So therein lies part of the problem. And people are saying, well, that's not fair. And we've tried in this country on a number of occasions now to enact electoral reform. I still remember in 2015, during that election here in this country, Justin Trudeau, who was then leader of the Liberal Party, but they were the third party in Commons at the dissolution, suggested that if he were to win, that this first past the post, as we've just described, this would be the last time that Canadians vote with the first past the post system. Well, that didn't happen. I mean, he did try, for electoral reform, struck a committee, and it just didn't go well, and it kind of fizzled out altogether. And I think part of the reason for that is that I think we as Canadians are very uneasy about change, first of all, with almost anything, but especially with our political process, and the implications of it and what it might mean. I mean, here in Ontario, and I think other provinces have tried this in the past as well, they've had referenda about let's enact change here. I think the McGuinty government here in Ontario back in those days actually had a referendum about, should we change the system of voting? This idea of first past the post, maybe there's a better way. And there were a couple of options, and let's discuss those briefly, okay? And I'm going to give you the quick version of this here. I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of it, but besides first past the post, which is the system we use, there is ranked balloting, and that's the system where you, as a voter, choose your first, second, and third choices for that particular office, and somebody has to get the majority. In other words, over 50%. And if nobody does get 50% when they count those all up, well, they go to the second choices and see what those were. And eventually, you whittle it down until you get your winner. And political parties don't seem to want to enact that sort of thing on a national level, which is interesting because all of the political parties in this country use that ranked balloting system to elect their party leaders. But for some reason, they don't feel comfortable giving that option to us in a broader base, which is interesting. Now, the other one is called proportional representation. I've got some major concerns about this one, and I think a lot of other people do. And basically what that means is, okay, everybody votes, and they count all the votes up at the end of the day, and now they get into the math of it. In other words, if this political party got, say, 30% of the popular vote, then they are entitled to 30% of the seats in Parliament. You got 40%, you get 40%, etc. And a lot of people think, well, that's just totally unfair, because there are some areas of the country, Ontario being one of them where we are, that has the majority of the population. And is it going to be equitable? Are different parts of the country going to get ripped off because they simply don't have the people there in that particular area to be able to elevate the vote? It's every time we talk about this and every time we say, okay, what do you guys think? Invariably, the whole concept of electoral reform gets voted down because we're saying we've got trepidation about this. We're not sure how this is going to work. What about the system we've got? Isn't perfect, but you know what? It's the system we've got, and we're comfortable with it. And that's kind of what we are like as not just as Canadians, but I think as humans. We develop a comfort level, and change can be difficult. And change to electoral reform even more difficult because, let's face it, I think a lot of us are aware right now of the importance. We might have just gone through the motions in past elections. Okay, we'll elect this government or that government, or hey, we're pissed off at these guys, so we'll elect these guys. Not a whole lot changes. I mean, there might be some nuances here and some tweaking here, but it was basically your life and my life and everyday Canadians didn't change a whole heck of a lot depending on who we elected. Well, that's all gone now because of the dynamic and some of the challenges that we're facing right now. We, I think, have an understanding that we got to get it right, and this is the system that we've got, so let's go with that. And we saw this happen in the most most recent election, of course. An awful lot of people are going to be coming back, I guess, May 26th, who didn't get 50% of the vote. They didn't get a majority of the vote, but they got a plurality. And we say, okay, that may not be quote unquote democratic, but it worked. It's the system that's there, so let's just stick with this. And I know that there's always going to be people that are going to say there can be a better way to do things. But as long as we're going to have more than two political parties, there's going to be some discrepancy about just who's got the power and how many votes get counted and what percentages, et cetera. And that's even happening in the states where there are basically two political parties. You're a Democrat, you're a Republican. And I know there are some independents and some others, and there are write-in ballots in some states, et cetera, which kind of muddies the waters here. But you still have this choice or that choice. In Canada, it's different. And vive la différence, right? If I can use a well-known phrase here to try to indicate that. It's the system we've got, and what it does, it puts an awful lot of pressure on the candidates and the political parties to say, well, we've got to do something to attract that. We've got to say, okay, even though there may be two or three other candidates, or I guess the most bizarre example was in the Carleton riding where Pierre Poilievre got beaten in this last election. They had a list of candidates there that looked like the track for the Kentucky Derby. There were 18 or 19 different candidates. It was ridiculous. And that's allowed under this system. And you could suggest that those are abuses of the system. Well, there are people who are using the system and using the rules. It was not illegal, and it's just something that can happen. It's one of the, I guess, weaknesses of the system, that it can be used and abused in that fashion. So every time we do this, and every time I've had this discussion in the past during the radio days, it's always, well, what can we do? Is there a better way to do this? And I don't think, first of all, the elected officials are in any hurry to do anything about this. Because let's face it, if you, under this current system, and the one we just used in this election, if you got elected, do you really want to say, well, let's change the way that we vote, which might put your continued presence in Parliament under scrutiny and whether or not you're going to get reelected? Once you get into political office, you kind of want to stay there, and you kind of like the system that got you there. And if that got you there, you want to continue with that system. And the other elements here, whether it's going to be proportional representation or in the case of rank balloting, could change that and make it more difficult for some of these people to get reelected into office. Plus the fact that, especially when we get into proportional representation, some of the third parties, fourth parties, fifth parties that don't have a hope in hell of getting through and getting elected would look at proportional representation and say, well, that might mean that we might get 2 or 3 or 5 seats or whatever in the next parliament, even though, we're never going to win a riding. It's some people say totally unfair. Others are going to say, well, they deserve a voice too. So I don't have a definitive answer for this. I don't think anybody does. But it's always going to be a debate, and it seems to be a debate that rears its head every time we have one of these elections to say, is this the best possible way to try to elect the people that are going to represent us and make these decisions? And the short answer for this is, we don't know. But it's the system we got. And it works with all its faults and with all its frailties and all the warts that seem to come with it. And there's this right now, this concern and this trepidation that, well, if we move to another system, maybe there are going to be more flaws than the one we have. And I know that it works in other countries. There are other jurisdictions that do this and say, hey, it's great. This is the way things work. France has been doing this for quite some time. They have runoff elections for their national government. And we've seen this happen in a number of European countries. And we say, well, good for them, but, we're going to stick with what we've got right now. So with all the concerns and all the arguments that are going to be going back and forth about, is this the best possible system? I guess the short answer to this is it's the system we got. And notwithstanding what this politician or that political party might say about, we have to change this, it's probably the system we're going to be stuck with, and we're just going to have to make it work. And that means you have to get good candidates, people that are going to work hard, and educated people that are going to be able to make decisions about who best to represent us. And if we get it wrong, and we do sometimes, the wrong people can get in there, the wrong political party can get in there, well, that's the system we've got, and we're just going to have to make it work. It's on us, really, as voters and as citizens, to do our homework and make sure that we get the best possible group electing to this parliament and representing us that we can possibly get. Sometimes we get it wrong, and as we found out historically, we have to live with those consequences, don't we? Anyway, always appreciate your input into this, and I know I'm going to get an awful lot of comments about this particular thing with your ideas about what should and shouldn't happen, about how we elect our elected representatives. Look forward to hearing from you on this one, too. That's it for this edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast. Of course, you can catch us on Substack, on Spotify, on Apple, certainly on YouTube and on Blue Sky and so many other different platforms. Look forward to the criticism. Bring it in, or your ideas about this, too. Pro, con, about what's happening with the way we elect our elected officials. In the meantime, I thank you, as always, to Madeline Kelly for the great work producing the show today. I'm Bill Kelly. Until next time, stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.